creep in the cafe. I was sitting in the cafe, looking at the rain falling down that night. I was a student and I had stopped in the cafe for some coffee and to catch up on some studying. It was getting dark early then, so I didn't notice when the black storm clouds began moving in. Before I knew it, the rain was pouring down. Occasional lightning lit up the sky so bright that for fleeting moments it seemed like it was daytime. I assumed that the storm wasn't going to last very long because storms seldom do. But I sat in that cafe for no less than 3 hours, hoping that it would pass. I didn't have an umbrella, and the walk back to my dorm wasn't going to be pleasant. The coffee shop was pretty empty as it got late. Around 10 at night, it was only me and the barista left. It was alright though, because it was a college town and students often spend hours and hours in that cafe hitting the books. Around that time, I heard the door open and I looked up to see someone coming into the shop. I almost immediately regretted it as the man's eyes locked with my own. Although I was just looking to see who it was, an eye lock can sometimes give them the wrong idea. And this man was not someone I wanted to get the wrong idea. He was a much older, almost homeless-looking man. He had long gray hair, an unshaven face, and was wearing a long green trench coat. I looked away and could still feel him looking at me when I did. He went up and ordered a coffee as I was working. Once he got his drink, he did exactly what I had feared he would. The man walked over to a table near me, despite the entire cafe being empty. He sat at the table right next to me, and he watched me. He sipped his coffee, and his eyes continuously remained on me. Have you ever had one of those experiences where you know you're being looked at, and you have to do everything in your power to make it seem like you didn't know? But your discomfort definitely revealed to the person that you were aware. Well, that was exactly what was going on. "Hey, do you need someone to get you another cup of coffee?" the man asked, and I inwardly groaned. I was hoping to avoid any talking. I looked up at the guy, forced a weak smile, and shook my head. "No thanks. I'll be leaving pretty soon," I replied and went back to my work. "You shouldn't be walking out in the rain alone," he told me. "Want me to walk you home?" He was trying too hard, and it was irritating. I shook my head. "No thanks. I'll be all right," I told him without looking up. The man didn't ask another question, but he didn't stop looking at me either. It was creepy as hell. Although I wasn't looking up, he was sitting right across from me, and I could see him, and actually feel him looking at me. After enough time had passed, I finally couldn't take it anymore. Walking home in the rain right then would be a lot better than remaining there and being stared at. Besides, I wasn't getting any work done. I quickly packed my things up and stood up. I decided the best thing to do was just leave as quickly as possible. As I hurried out the door, the man tried to ask me something again, but I didn't care. I just got out the door and away from him as quickly as possible. I got out into the rain, holding my book bag under my coat so I wouldn't get my books wet. It was awkward, but I didn't have any real choice. My dorm was a bit of a walk away, and I had to try and get there as quickly as possible. The rain was hitting me pretty hard, and the lightning and thunder was pretty frequent. I was going to be totally drenched by the time I got home. I turned the corner to go towards the dormitories, and right when I turned the corner, a bright lightning shot lit up the neighborhood. And since I was turning, I saw out of the corner of my eye that the man was following me. I was immediately worried, but I tried not to let it affect me too much. I just hurried. It became difficult walking because part of me wanted to look back at every moment. But when you're being followed, it's just never a good idea to let the person know that you know you're being followed. I just hurried, hoping against hope that the man would not catch up with me and that I would not slip. As I saw my dorm coming up close, the temptation to look behind me was just too great for me to resist. In a moment I will always regret, I turned my head around and I saw the guy following me. Even worse, he noticed that I noticed him. When he did, he began hurrying. I guess he figured he had nothing to lose. With a knot formed in my stomach, I realized I just had to go for broke and run as quickly as I could. It was difficult, yes, and looking back over my shoulder made it even worse. The man wasn't in the best of shape, but he was running after me very fast. I panicked, and although I hated running and rarely did it, I kicked myself into overdrive and ran like I had never run before. I looked behind me, and the guy was coming after me. Fortunately, I was just about at my dorm building, and I knew I would be safe. However, although the man hadn't really gained too much on me, I realized that I would have to stop at the dormitory entrance to get my key card out of my book bag. I was lucky, though. Apparently, I wasn't the only one outside, and before I got to the dormitory, another student was approaching it. And thank God that it was a guy, and not a very small guy. As he was opening the door up, he must have caught sight of me out of the corner of his eye. I assumed he saw the guy behind me too, and I yelled and asked him to hold the door open. He did, and I ran right in past the guy. When I was inside, he pulled the door shut, and as he did, I noticed that the man had stopped pursuing me. Instead, he stood at a distance and looked at me, safe in the foyer of the dormitory, looking back at him. The other student was very kind to me and asked me what was happening. I explained it to him, and he asked me if I needed him to go and teach the creep a lesson. I told him not to and that I appreciated his help. I was just happy I was safe. The other student told me it was all right, and he went on his way. After taking a little bit of time to calm down, I left the foyer and made my way over to the stairs. As I did, something on the school bulletin board caught my eye. Looking at it, my nervous system jumped. There was a poster of the man, posted by a feminist group on campus. It was unmistakably the man who was chasing me. A warning was posted that this man was a convicted rapist who, although he had served his time, was living in this town. I had an idea of what the man had wanted while he was chasing me, but it was even worse when it was confirmed. Number 2. In the Woods. I remember when I was younger, and the thunderstorms would begin to roll in. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, on the Navy base. Thunderstorms there were beautiful. Often the day would begin very clear, but then you see the black clouds moving in off the ocean. It was beautiful to see the storm with lightning and thunder off to the distance, while it was still bright out overhead. And it never took too long for the storm to finally overtake the sky. And Virginia storms last for a long time. As much as I love thunderstorms, I hate getting caught in them, though. I hate being wet. I won't even go swimming because I don't like the feeling of being wet. When I take a shower, I'll scrub clean as quickly as possible and then get out and get dry. Whenever it rains, I will try to find some place to go just so I don't get wet at all. When I was about 15 years old, my dislike of getting wet almost got me into a lot of trouble. I was out on a basketball court playing a game with a few friends of mine. The court was a bit far from my house. While I was playing, I saw off in the distance the black clouds as they began moving in. The lightning was visible, but the thunder was rolling only very quietly. I usually was pretty good at knowing how quickly a storm was moving in, but this one was moving a bit faster than I had anticipated. When the sky above me quickly began turning dark, I knew I had to end the game and be on my way. Quickly the sun was blocked out, and the area darkened. The wind picked up, and I knew my time was limited. On the way home, the wind became vicious. It was the kind of wind that feels like it was capable of blowing you over. Although it was only about 1 in the afternoon, it had gotten so dark above my head and around me that it may have been nighttime. The lightning was cracking hard above my head, lighting up the clouds, which were pretty dark to begin with. The worst part of all this was I was worried that I would not make it home before getting drenched. Behind the housing there was a large fenced-off area with lots of trees. We weren't really supposed to go back there. I don't really know what it was called, but it was a slightly swampy, forested area. I had been back there before, and I knew I could take it to get back to my house. If I cut through it, I could take a path that would get me to my house, where I could then climb over the fence and be right in my backyard. A loud and bright crack of thunder made up my mind for me. I went over to the gate and quickly climbed over it. I had to walk through some grass to find the path through the woods. It had been dark enough before going into the woods, but now it was worse. It was really hard to see where I was going. Plus, there were tons of dead pine needles blowing around me, and it really sucked. A few of them even got in my eye. But so far, I was still making it without getting wet, and that was what was most important to me. I'd been through the wooded area several times, and I knew my way through it, so I wasn't too worried about how dark it was. It was inconvenient, but not terrible. The path went through a clearing up ahead of me, and I knew at least when I got there that I would be able to orientate myself a little better. The lightning flashes would give me a much better view of my surroundings. I was doing a pretty good job considering the circumstances, when regrettably I began to feel the slightest raindrops falling down upon me. I cursed a bit, and then tried to pick up the pace. I thought if I was lucky, I could get to the house before it picked up too much. As it was sprinkling, I made it into the clearing, which wasn't too far from where I had to go to get through the fence and into my yard. As I made it there, though, I realized that somebody was there. It was hard to make out who it was, but somebody was definitely standing in the clearing. This wasn't too unusual, as many of the teenagers in the neighborhood would hang out there to drink and smoke pot. But no one should be doing that in this sort of weather. Just seeing that person there gave me pause, and I had to try and get a good look at him, just out of curiosity. Whoever it was, he was tall. I mean, really tall. I decided to just cut out of the clearing and get to my house. Right then, a crack of lightning lit up the entire area, and for about a second and a half, I got a view of the man. He was enormous, and he was wearing a dark black coat. And worst of all, he was holding what looked like a hatchet at his side. But just as quickly as I had seen him, the light went out, and it was back to a silhouette. I could still see him in the dark, and he didn't move at all, but he was blocking the way on the path. Gathering my courage up, I turned and ran back the way that I came. Forgotten was my fear of being wet, because my fear of an enormous man carrying a hatchet was much worse. I slipped once or twice, and the rain began pouring down hard. I didn't look back at all, and I made it to the fence where I'd originally came in. I got back to the area where the basketball court was. It was in the middle of a commercial area, so there were people around, or at least there were buildings with people in them. Once I was clear of the area, I looked back and saw that the man had followed me. He followed me, but he hadn't gotten over the fence. He watched me from the other side as I made it to a store, found a payphone, and called my parents to come pick me up. Although I told them what I saw when I got home, wet as can be, there really wasn't anything anyone could do about it. Although the man had followed me, and it was not legal to be in that area, I had absolutely no further information on the man at all. I never went back in that area again, though. Whatever the guy was up to, I decided that swampy area was all for him. Number 3. Home in a Storm. During the summers when I was a teenager, I finally got to begin staying up as late as I wanted to. It was a new kind of freedom that I really enjoyed. Right away, I began staying up later than the rest of the family, who generally all went to bed really early anyway. When they did, I would stay up for hours, enjoy the solitude, and watch horror movies. We didn't have much money, but the house we lived in was rather big. It had a total of 7 bedrooms, even though it was just my parents and 3 kids. So there were many empty rooms that were just used for other things. The point is, the house was very big, and a lot of it was very empty, and that made it kind of scary and ominous, especially when you're alone. This one particular night, my family actually had left to spend time at my grandmother's house. I really didn't want to go and was happy to have the house to myself for a whole night. I was enjoying myself after my family left. A thunderstorm began while I was watching a couple of movies. It's fun and only enhances the horror movie when this happens. I was watching A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the first beautiful crack of a thunderbolt lit up the entire outside for a few moments, and that was great. The rain eventually began falling really hard, and the lightning and thunder was a bit overwhelming, but it was atmosphere. It was great atmosphere. Toward the end of my movie, the rain was quieting down. As it did, I began hearing a loud dripping noise coming from the front of the house. The rain had almost completely stopped, but the thunder and lightning did not. And the dripping noise did not stop, and it only began to aggravate me because It was coming from the wall behind the TV. Annoyed, I got up and walked up to the TV to turn it up when I couldn't find the remote control. As I walked up to the TV, an extremely bright flash of lightning went off, illuminating the entire house and outside of the house. And when it did, it lit up the outside so well that in the window next to the TV, I saw a person wearing pantyhose over his face, right outside the window, looking right at me. It was only for a very brief moment, and when the light faded, I could no longer see him. I jumped back, a bit frightened over what had happened. I was freaked, but unsure what to do. Without the lightning, I was unsure if the man was still there or not. I slowly backed up to the couch, not taking my eye off the window. Another thunderbolt shook the house, and when it did, I did not see anyone at the window. I wasn't sure what was worse, if he was still there, or if he had left. If he had left, then he could be watching me from anywhere. I carefully went over to the stairs and slowly made my way up to the top. It was difficult because I had to walk sideways with my back to the wall. I didn't want the man to be watching me from behind. I crept into my parents' room and turned on the light immediately. Searching through the closet, I found my dad's gun. I took it and went into my own room. After looking everywhere to make sure no one was in my room, I curled up on my bed with the gun. I waited until the sun rose up in the sky before I was able to go to sleep. The guy never came back as far as I know. But every time I was in the house, in the dark, watching a movie, I always felt him there. I felt him watching me, and I have never been able to shake that feeling. Good evening, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button. If you're not subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the button next to the tabby if you'd like to be notified of new content. I have always been a big fan of Thunderstorms myself, and I really enjoyed making this video. Nothing is better than a nice dark day or night with dark clouds, bright lightning, and loud thunder. I loved it as a kid, and I love it now. Now, I know I'm always apologizing for everything, and it's just the way that I am. It's not going to change. But if you're sick of it, I apologize for that too, and yes, I realize that's a little ironic. But I'm sorry this video was a day later than I said it would. I had a bit of a problem where I had 3 stories picked out, and one of the submitters admitted to me that he wrote the story himself and that it was complete fiction, so I had to find a 3rd story that fit my theme. I also want to thank everyone who was submitting questions for the Q&A video. That one will be coming out next. I also have a reading of a story by Celestial Noir, again I hope I pronounced that correctly, and a video about Scary Walks Home, which will feature another channel, The Fear. I've included links to both their channels here. Normally, I would have more to talk about, but since I'll be doing the Q&A video next, I'll save everything for then. In closing, make sure to check in your closet and under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.